We're joined in studio today by Ekemini Uwan. This powerful young woman is a speaker, writer, and consultant under the name Systematic Theology. In her spare time, she sips coffee with like-minded women to podcast about culture, grace, and truth. Ekemini, welcome to Feel Like You Belong.
Thank you for having me, Alan. It's great to be here.
So when we were talking earlier, we were chatting about your family's immigration history. Your folks come from southeastern Nigeria. Can you talk a little bit about that part of your family's journey?
Yes. My parents are Nigerian, so that would make me, some say first generation, some say second generation. I think I go by first technically since we were first generation born here. But yeah, they're from a minority tribe called the Ibibio tribe in the southeastern portion of Nigeria, or a section, I should say, of Nigeria. And they came in the early 70s. My father came in about 71, and I believe my mom came in about 73. They grew up in the same village, so it's kind of like that type of love story where they've known each other since they were small children, went to the same church and everything. My parents came out here to give us more opportunity, particularly for education, and so that we could have more upward mobility. And so they've been here for a very long time, even got married in California, which is where I was born and raised in the Bay Area. And so that's where they were married in 1980. And so that's where they settled, and that's where myself and my younger sisters grew up. I'm just grateful for their sacrifices.
So how often do you and your family get back to Nigeria?
Not that often, to be honest. Actually, a lot of my family from Nigeria actually lives here. So They've been here for so long now that, my grandma, even my grandma's a citizen. So that kind of lets you know we have some pretty deep roots here. But the last time I was actually in Nigeria was in 2015. The time before that was in 1995. That was my first trip ever to Nigeria. So in 2015, I went for my sister's wedding, her traditional marriage that she had there.
So if we were having a conversation in Ibibio, how would you be doing?
Awesome, which means I'm good, I'm well, I'm strong. So, and Abadia is how are you? Mm-hmm.
Okay,
what
super.
You
Super. So it's my observation that Africans in the United States have an interesting perspective on race in the U.S. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I can't speak for all Africans, but I think for me, my story is a bit unique in that my parents never made any sort of hard delineation between us as Nigerian Americans and our African American brothers and sisters, and that's due in part, well, I'd say for a big reason why is actually because of the reality of the transatlantic slave trade,
Sure.
And just how that's impacted Africans and African Americans. And so my parents always made a connection for myself and my sisters that we are cousins, distant cousins,
Sure.
from our Black American kinsmen, if you will.
Sure.
And so for me, I never grew up, thinking that we were so far off or so different, from our African American brothers and sisters. And as a result, and I think part of that is because my parents always did intimate to us the fact that we are Black in America, and so that we are also impacted, by systemic racism and the same things that tend to ensnare our African American brothers and sisters also ensnare us. So I think that's a bit of a unique perspective. I think maybe when you're comparing the way I was brought up in comparison to maybe some other Africans in America, I think sometimes there's that a chasm, but I thank God that my parents actually did not do that.
Okay.
Because I think if they had, I probably wouldn't be maybe in the work or in the ministry that I do, which is like more centered on race and anti-racism, things like that. So it's a little unique in that regard.
Sure, because for Africans walking down the street, they get treated in similar ways as African Americans, but they have some cultural differences, linguistic differences also that apply, and so sometimes there isn't always a seamless blending for those two groups internally.
Sure. I mean, there's many. I mean, yeah. The reality is that we are also subject to police brutality, to death at the hands of police. There's Alfredo Longo. There's Matthew Ajibade. But this is the reality, you know. But at the same time, yes, we do have a cultural. We have a more of a direct connection,
Sure.
right, to our roots. I could tell you the village that that I'm from. I could tell you the language. I can understand the language. But that's not even common even among first generation Nigerian Americans either. Oftentimes we don't know the language and oftentimes don't understand it. So there's some differences, and there's countless ways to be Black. So Blackness is very broad, and it's very deep, and it's very wide, and there's no one way to be Black, and we thank God for that diversity within the unity that we have amongst each other.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about who and what is systematic theology?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Systematic theology. Well, so I had a little stroke of a clever moment a couple years ago when I was in seminary. Actually, a friend of mine was encouraging me. He's like, "You have a lot of good thoughts. You should write." I'm like, not really. But one day I just decided, oh, okay, let me just at least create this WordPress blog. And I just was thinking about what's my favorite subject in seminary. And my favorite subject was systematic theology. And for some reason, my mind just makes systematic theological connections with what happens currently, either politically, culturally. I can always just make those types of connections by it's just very seamless and very easy for me to do. And so I was like, well, why don't I just name the blog, after my favorite subject, systematic theology, but also insert my identity in there, which is I'm a Black woman who's doing systematic theology. So let's do the SISTA and drop the SYSTE. So that's what systematic theology is about. So I interact with current events, pop culture, politics, and news, and just talk about those things, obviously, and race as well. And talk about those things from a biblical perspective, but specifically systematic theology will somehow be woven in there, typically, when I'm speaking, when I write and podcast.
So does this have you traveling a lot?
Yes. Yes. So actually, honestly, this is really providential that we were actually able to do this interview because I've been traveling nonstop since August. I'd say. Wow. I've been going in and out, and I don't even know how many planes I've been on at this point. And I'm actually going to be traveling this Sunday. So this was perfect timing. So I love what I do, and it's a true blessing.
So talk a little bit about what you do, the services you provide, and the people you work with.
Yeah, so I do a host of many things. I do actually host a podcast called Truth's Table with two of my good friends, Dr. Christina Edmondson and Michelle Higgins, who is an activist in St. Louis. I also host conferences, so I get asked to do a whole bunch of things, which is what I really love about my ministry. You never know what requests you'll kind of get, and you'll be like, "Can I do this?" Wait. Yeah, I'll do that. Let's try it. So sometimes I'll host conferences. It just depends. Like I just hosted the Call and Response Conference in October of last month in Rochester, New York, which was such a great experience. It's like a Black church conference, and it was just beautiful, really a beautiful experience. And then I moderate panels. So I just did that for the Jude 3 Project, where we're talking about scholars and people that are, PhD, the heavyweights, if you will, in theology and in the church. And so moderating panels, I do that. And then I go and speak. So I lecture. I'll lecture sometimes depending on what I'm asked to do. I'll lecture on race, of course, sometimes on like how the church can engage with, say, Black Lives Matter, talking about white supremacy, or even talking about issues within our community like colorism or something like that. So I can span the gamut, if you will, on subjects that I touch. And then I can preach on Sundays when I'm asked to do so. I'm not a pastor though. And so I do not want that responsibility. But yeah, so sometimes I'm called in to preach on a Sunday. So I'll come and open the word. So I do a whole host of things, and then of course I do some consulting as well when I'm asked to do so by some organizations as well. Sometimes they ask me to build out a theology that's connected to their mission. and their objective for the organization. And as a public theologian, that's right within my wheelhouse. So I'll do that too.
Fantastic. So in between all of these comings and goings and speakings and preachings, you find time to sit down with two other women and do a podcast, a periodic podcast. Talk about Truth's Table.
Yes, Truth's Table, Midwives of Culture for Grace and Truth. It is a table built and set for Black women specifically, but everybody else listens. And so it is set primarily for Black women, and they get a seat at the table. They get preference. Their issues are front and center. Everybody else gets standing room. They're welcome. You're welcome. But they get, the standing room, because oftentimes we are the ones that are oftentimes neglected, unprotected in our society, as Malcolm X said many, many, many years ago. And sadly, his words still written true. And so we want to make sure that we are centering those who are most marginalized. And so from our viewpoint and our vantage point, it is Black women, and we're speaking as Black women. And so the point of the table is that not that we are the arbiters of truth, we are not, but we point to the one who is truth, which is Jesus Christ, and we believe that truth is a person. So we will talk about everything from our hair down to police brutality, to prisons, whether they're just or unjust, multicultural churches. Are they a safe haven, or is it a bulwark of white supremacy? How do we sift through that? What does the gospel have to say about all of these things? And so that's the lens that we filter all of our conversations through. Tried and true, somehow, some way, we're going to get to Jesus and what Jesus has to say about all of the issues that are on the table, because he cares about those things.
Yeah. So how did the three of you get together? Because you are all separated by hundreds of miles.
We are. So, we were at a conference in August called the LDR Conference, which is a conference that Michelle organizes in St. Louis. So it was about over Labor Day weekend in 2016, I believe. The producer for Bo York, the producer for Pass the Mic, the Witnesses podcast, came up to me during lunch and said, "Hey, you should have your own podcast. You have a lot of good thoughts and all these things." And I was like, "No, I shouldn't. I don't want to carry my own show, number one. Number two, I have no desire to I just don't like the spotlight just being on me solo, but I would like to share it. I can do that." And so he said, "Okay." He's like, "What about if you, Michelle, and Christina did a show together?" And I'm like, that might work, actually, because the three of us had already formed like a group chat, maybe I would say earlier that year. And so our friendship was starting to kind of blossom anyway. And it seemed very organic. And so I was like, okay, I'll go and talk to them and see what they say. We didn't really know what a podcast was. We just know that the three of us were really opinionated. We got thoughts, and we're all theologically in the same kind of wheelhouse, if that makes sense, or in the
Absolutely.
same, in the same school, if you would. So I talked to each of them, and they were like, okay. I don't think any of us knew what we were getting into, but but that's how it came to be. So
and you're clearly having fun doing it.
Yes, definitely. So we're actually going to start recording for season 3 this upcoming weekend. So
thank you. Well, we'll be sure to put the URL on the screen for our viewers to see and hope they can tune in. We're going to have to wrap up shortly, but I had 2 last questions for you. You handle some sticky topics, including, I think, upcoming is reparations.
Yes.
Do you have a few short words about that topic?
Yes, reparations now. Okay, so actually that's how we started our second season for Truth's Table. And yeah, I think at some point our conversations about race have got to move out of the realm of theory. I'm an academic. My mind is trained that way. That's how my natural bent is. But I think at some point it's time for the church to step up and actually lead on this front, right? Because she has done much damage. I'd say specifically the American church, not only the American church, right? Europeans had a hand in all of this too, but I'm speaking from my context. But yeah, so I think it's high time for the church to begin to own up, not only to confessing her sin, which has been hard to get her to do, but to also making restitution, making reparations. This is a very biblical principle. We see this in the New Testament. We see it in the Old Testament. How we own the sins of the fathers, and then we also make restitution, for that, for the damage that was done. And so when we see that in the gospel, and in the gospel of Jesus Christ, when you really think about it and you boil it down, it is a reparation. There was a breach between our relationship between us and God, and that was a one-way breach, right? It wasn't God that sinned against us. You can't do that. It was us, who sinned against him. And so I think, and Jesus came and made that, and bridged that gap for us, made that reparation for us so that we would have peace with God and become his own children. And now we've turned and now we live, right, in light of that. And so reparations to me is just an outworking of the gospel, plain and simple.
Sure.
That there should be, we wrong these group of people, and we need to make that wrong right as best as we can on this side of glory.
Yeah. So last question for you. When we were chatting earlier, you were talking about the importance of comforting the afflicted and
Yes.
afflicting the comfortable.
Yes.
Can you take us out with that thought?
Yeah. That's pretty much what my ministry is about. So, I have the hard task of being able to speak to two groups simultaneously, the oppressed and those who are the oppressor, right? And God is on the side of the oppressed. We know that, right? But he doesn't forsake the oppressor, right? Because we know that Paul was an oppressor. He was persecuting the church. He was putting hits out on Christians. We know he was pretty evil when he was Saul, right? But he turned by God's grace, right? So I think that it's important to understand that God is always calling us to move toward those who are most marginalized, those who are the most vulnerable in society. He's always shaking us out of our own slumber, shaking us out of our own comfort, because all of us have it to some degree, some level of privilege, if you will. And so God is always calling us to release those privileges, release that comfort in order to sacrifice and stand alongside and come alongside those who are marginalized and oppressed. And so in my case, it does involve me having to speak hard words to those who are comfortable, right? Who enjoy positions of power and privilege at the expense of the benefit, right? Or at the cost of those who are marginalized. And so my job is really to lift up biblical truths, particularly about us being made in the image of God, Black people specifically, being made in the image of God, because we've internalized so much from white supremacy and really have come to hate ourselves. And there's different degrees and different levels to this thing, but it manifests just even in the way that we even read scripture, and so I think that, so my job is really to help uplift, affirm, edify my brothers and sisters according to the flesh, right? And then also, though, speak hard truths that the Spirit gives me, not just speaking out of my own flesh and my own opinion, because that's not going to do anything for anybody, but speaking those hard truths, those hard gospel truths to our white brothers and sisters who have positions of power, who can actually leverage that power in such a way that they can create more equitable systems and spaces.
And I think because you have that background that you're speaking from, it's not just this, strong woman with a firm opinion. You actually have some grounding to speak from, and I think that gives you some credibility in these longer conversations. I wish we had more time to go on, but this has been a lovely conversation. Good luck to you in both your podcasting and being systematic in your work. Hopefully our paths will cross someday in Grand Rapids. We'd love to sit at the table if there's room locally sometime.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan, for having me. Appreciate you.
It's been a pleasure, Ekemini. Take care.
Bye.
And thank you for joining us. If you're watching us on TV, stay tuned for our following segments on language and culture. If you're watching Feel Like You Belong on the internet, we hope you will share your feedback with us via our website and YouTube channel. And be sure to catch our many other stories about the inspiring immigrants and their children who make these United States a better place.